Hello folks, this is the week 7 Contract B Zoom and welcome to everybody. I'll do the usual waggly finger stuff and say please get cracking on your assignment. If you have any queries, post them up to the Moodle forum or post something up on Facey. The Papa R PM chats are going off, mostly with memes actually. not a whole lot of substantive comment in there just yet, but I will get there. I'm sure we'll get there. I think that people are busily scouting around in in the case law at the moment to try and get their head around the area. And I suspect that, sorry, I'm just going to clean my glasses here. And I suspect that once people have, looked into the case law a little bit more, the PM chats will fire up. That tends to historically be the way that things go with that stuff. So let me know if there's anything that you need me to do in the chat groups. I have been moderating them. And queries or questions about how that's all operating so far?
I'm just time poor at the moment, so I'm just stretching myself and doing what I can.
Yeah.
This weekend looks good for me.
That's all you can do. That's all that you can do. So I understand.
Are you learning the alphabet?
Am I learning the alphabet?
He's talking about behind me. My daughter has a little study desk in here as well.
Yes, I like your story.
That's so cute. That's so cute. Did you like my littlest kid in the Contract B TV promo?
That was awesome. I loved it.
She's a born actress, that one. She's just too funny. Anyway, if people, there was actually a point to me doing that, and it was a bit helpful for people last time around. If you do want to have a crack at being the media liaison for your client, the media representative for your client, you may do up a short video, 30 seconds to 1 minute. Try and get some sound bites in there for your client. And have a little play around with, presenting to camera. Because it's super important when you do come to, record your actual oral submissions, that you present to camera in much more of a conversational tone as you would with a judge. So, I don't want any of these ones reading from your script, because quite a few of these people did this last term and it was really boring for about 8 minutes, and some of them went on for 12 minutes and I stopped listening after the cutoff point. No judge in the land is going to want to see you reading from a script to them. At the hazard of repetition, you need to get your collective heads around the fact that when you are in court, your job is not to read a beautiful IRAC to a judge. Your job is to talk to them and to convince them that your point of view, so far as the law is concerned, is the argument that you want to run for your client. So you need to, this is why I say, I don't mind you working in PM chat groups. I don't mind you working in study groups. You can devise email groups if you wish to do so. I would heartily also recommend Zooming with your mates. Because you can Zoom, can't you, from your end? The platform allows you to initiate a Zoom with your mates, doesn't it? I would really recommend, once if you've made a few connections in the PM chat group, or if you know a couple of people that are doing Contract B this term round, get yourself some groups together and practice on each other, because it's really useful. And if not, do a little, 30-second to 1 minute video, like I said, and just practice and post it up to Facey, or send it to me in an email and ask me for some critique. So that way you're getting some valuable feedback before you actually do your final submissions. Okay. Again, at the risk of repetition, beg, borrow or steal a jacket, because I have actually been there where people have been told, I'm sorry, madam, I can't hear you, by the judge, and that's code for go away and find yourself a jacket. So please make sure that you're appropriately attired. The other thing is, I want you to be standing, because that's how you would address the court. So don't forget to be standing. Don't forget your appearance at the very beginning of your video. I've already given you instructions about that on your instructions sheet for the assignment. Okay, so that's probably all I wanted to say about the assignment. Was there any queries thus far that you wanted to quickly get squared away before we kick off for this evening?
How do we actually record it? Do we just use the computer?
Yes, just use your computer, or I had people using their mobile phones last time. That's fine. No. I had other people doing it on laptops. But do try, and if you're going to use a mobile phone, make sure that you're using it on a stable surface. And I think I said this in one tutorial before, but don't do it in the toilet. Because I had one student do it last time, and it wasn't because it was in a toilet that I object to it, but it was because the echo was so bad, I couldn't really hear a lot of what they were saying. So
do we record it on the Zoom session, our own, and then post it to YouTube, do we? Is that how we do it?
The flush is off-putting. All of the instructions are on the instruction sheet, Daryl.
Yeah, I've seen it.
Yep. So you're going to upload to YouTube as an unlisted video. Mm-hmm. Well, you can load it up as a public video if you want, and then the whole world will see. But I would recommend unlisted, and then you just get yourself the link, and then you paste the link in your document, in your script that you send in to me. I actually also think that that you can, and correct me if I'm wrong, or if someone else has done it differently, you can also load the link directly into the submissions page. I don't know if you can or not. I'll confirm that later. But if it's easier for you to do it that way, maybe we'll explore that also. But that's, I'll email you about that in the next day or so. Once I've gotten, Tazak's going to ring me back, and I'll square that away with them first before we, do anything official. So yeah, if you want to record it via Zoom, you can record it via Zoom. That's all good. Okay. So without further ado, let us go to our documente for this evening. Okay. So now we have termination. Now, termination is great because I know it kind of feels like, you're having to do new readings this week as well as doing your assignment readings. Your assignment readings shouldn't be too much burden for the second assignment, because we've already covered, misleading and deceptive conduct before, in terms of silence and all that stuff with the, that drop-in Zoom that we did. So that shouldn't be too much. It should be mainly revision, and also estoppel's mainly revision as well. So I'm hoping that you're finding that the actual research for assignment 2 shouldn't be too bad. What I want to talk about today is reasonably important, because I know it seems like I'm hitting you hard and hitting you early, but this stuff that we're going to talk about tonight directly relates to the end of term exam. So listen up, folks. I would like to do a reasonably thorough recap of the main concepts that we need to be dealing with so far as termination is concerned, so that we are feeling quite confident when we head into the exam itself, end of term exam. Now, I'm assuming that you can see my Word document on screen. And what I want to do is a bit of an open mic thingy. I guess, have you had a chance to do the readings on termination? Can I have a thumbs up if you've had a chance to do the termination reading, or a thumbs down, or one up and one down like that if you're still going on the assignment stuff? How are you going, Daryl? Did you manage to get the...
Yeah, I got through about half the chapter so far and copied out all the relevant cases.
Okay.
I've been going through that, which one was it? Progressive mailing house.
And Charlie.
Yeah, I've been going on through that one as well.
Okay, good.
Highlighting it. Haven't got to the other ones yet, I'm afraid.
That's okay. What I wanted to do was do a bit of an open mic thing, but we will just kind of do a brief cook's tour of, what's going on with the chapter, and then we can hone in a little bit more at the back of things to the Coca-Cola case itself, and then we can just do a little IRAC. The end of term exam, it's not, as you can gather by the cases that I have told you to make sure that you read, it's not really a case of inability to perform, because that's really, more like the Coca-Cola case that we go through this week for the tutorial problem is a case of anticipatory breach. And it's also more of a case of inability to perform, because they served up a whole stack of yo-yos that just were really rubbish quality. And that was said to be indicative of them not being able to perform the rest of the contract up to scratch in terms of quality and what have you. So the Coca-Cola case is more of a case of being unable to perform. So it's inability really that's at issue more so there. In terms of progressive mailing house and Tabali, and certainly progressive, that's more a case of unwillingness to perform. So there are a few different ways that you can terminate, and what I want us to think about are the three main ways that you can terminate. Firstly, can someone give me one way that you might be able to terminate because of
breach? Is that what you're talking about?
Yeah.
Yep, breach of contract. They haven't done their part of it.
Yes, and any old. Oh, sorry. There's loads of chats going off. The chat's going off. Hang on. Let me see. Repudiation. Yes. Okay. So now, Daryl, can I get you to unpack that? Due to the other party's breach of what?
Of the terms of the contract.
What kind of term?
It'll be a conditional term.
Essential.
Yes. Yes, thank you very much. Okay, so can you remember now back to the weird and wacky contract A? What's your test? What's your main case for testing whether or not a term is a condition or not?
Whether it's at the main root of the contract. Without it, there's no point having the contract.
Yes.
Is it Luna Park?
Yes. Yes, it is. Okay, so the test of the test of essentiality from the Luna Park case. Where are we? Associated newspapers and banks, and also the tramways in Luna Park. It's got to appear from the general nature of the contract considered as a whole or from a particular term or terms that, can someone finish that sentence? The promise was so important that what? The party wouldn't have entered.
He wouldn't have entered because there'd be no benefit for him. Is that it?
Yes. Oh, so let me just copy and paste here. Here's something I prepared earlier. From the contract as a whole or from a particular term or terms, the promise was so important they wouldn't have entered the contract unless they'd been assured of a strict or at least substantial performance. And that should also be bullet pointed. That was apparent to the promisor. Okay. Now, I'll get on to other kinds of term in a minute. Okay, so second way that you can terminate. Might make that one bigger. So breach of condition or
repudiation.
Yep. Okay, I will. And
It's the common law.
That was number one. So if it's not in the common law, it might be your.
Oh.
It might be in your contract. Okay. So at common law, you can certainly breach. And if you do so, you don't need to have a clause in your actual contract itself saying that the innocent party can terminate. If it's a breach of condition, you know, what's one of the things that makes it a condition? What's one of the biggest flags in drafting terms that you can put into a term that will say to any court that has to read it, this is a condition? What's one of the best ways?
Express terms.
Yes.
Like in time frames and that kind of thing.
You mean like you could say, as per clause 3.1, if this is not met, then, oh, okay, you want to keep going. Yeah, then this contract can be terminated. Or rescinded. It was probably a better terminology, rescinded.
Terminated. No, that's it. So the clearest flag that you can put in your drafting to a court that this is an essential term of the contract is you set out the term and then you have, you know, a sub clause or a rider at the very end. Breach of this condition may allow the other, or gives rise in the right of a right to the other party to terminate the contract. So telling the other party that you might terminate for breach of that condition is a good way to flag it as a condition. Okay, and Mary, I think you were thinking about when you want to make time clauses very clearly a condition. The magic words there are time is of the essence. Of the essence.
Yeah, and also what Daryl was saying too, it's how you write up the contract and to make sure that it's written well, regardless of what subject matter is there, that every single thing that's written into it, that you ensure for your client, if you're writing the contract, of course, that you make it so that if those conditions are met, that the contract itself can be terminated.
Yes.
So whether it's a time frame matter, or whether, as he said, this is what is so important to the contract that without it there is no contract. You actually write that in, so you've got it there as an evidentiary way to prove that the contract hasn't been met. So therefore, it's it's breach. It can be terminated.
Yes. Mm-hmm. Exactly. Clear drafting is gold. It's gold. Now that Mary said that, can I really throw the fox among the pigeons and say sometimes you will deliberately draft a clause such that it is not clear. If the lack of clarity benefits your client. But that's just a sneaky, jaded commercial lawyer trick. But generally speaking, clarity is the go. So now, repudiation. What are the things that indicate repudiation?
Unwillingness.
And the other one is?
A refusal to perform.
Yes. Your refusal to perform will normally be unwillingness. So, unwillingness, inability. Something's gone wrong for inability, that you just can't get the thing done. Unwillingness is usually that kind of... Do you know what I mean? Hoxter and Delatour is normally the case that you will cite for that. In terms of unwillingness, has anybody got so far in Progressive Mailing House? Maybe I'll ask Daryl. Has anyone got so far in Progressive Mailing House as to be able to tell me what the test is that quite a few of the judges use in Progressive Mailing House for repudiation in the sense of unwillingness? Anyone?
If it's within the first 18 pages, I've probably read it.
After a while, it's just text, isn't it? It's just patterns that goes in front of your eyes.
I actually got amazed at how long they still stayed there after they were arguing. They were there for years. Thinking, crikey, why don't they just pack up and go?
Yeah, it's one of those things, isn't it? Human nature. What am I doing there? Unwillingness. Here we go. If a party or announces liabilities or shows they intend not to be bound or only fulfill it in ways that's substantially inconsistent with their obligations, they may have repudiated. Now, this is your general formulation, unwilling or unable. We'll get that out of there because that's up here. 2. Unwilling or unable. In terms of being unwilling, the test in Progressive Mailing House, the party demonstrates they intend to fulfil the contract in a manner substantially inconsistent with their obligations and not in any other way. Now, that, of course, was a case of fairly flagrant, a flagrant series of breaches.
It was over a period of time. really quite a significant period of time of notification.
Yes, it was over a period of time. I didn't put the dates down on mine, but yes, it was a...
Emails were between March and September or something like that.
Yeah, it was. And, you know, they were serious things that had gone on there. You know, it wasn't just a lessor being picky with a lessee for, you know, not sweeping their front veranda. I mean, it was serious stuff that had gone on. And like I said to you before, I would strongly recommend that for both of these cases, you go through and do yourself a little sheet like that with the events that happened in Progressive Mailing House. Just do the events and summarise the judgment there, and then Lorinda and Capalaba Park on the other side, just to map out in your own mind what happened and when, so that you've got a little ready reckoner when you're heading to the exam. So that's Progressive Mailing House. Lorinda and Capalaba Park, of course, was a slightly different factual scenario. What was the issue there?
Is that the registration or stamp duty and it needed to be done?
Yes, it absolutely was. Now, in that case, they also tended to use the substantially inconsistent formula. However, I particularly like Dean and Dawson's comment. They say, where someone has shown a shilly-shallying attitude. And here's a bit of alliteration for you. Procrastination practiced. It's like Peter Piper picked a peck of pickled pepper. That's the you know, they're the benchmarks they used. So I quite like both of those. Did I interrupt someone?
No, go ahead.
Okay, so with delay, I just want to make sure that you're all square on the whole issue of delay. And particularly before you head into the discussions in the casebook on Luinda and Lace, and there's a couple of other decent ones in there as well, For and White. There's another one in there which is quite useful. But what's the go with the issue where, for example, if I'll just put here delay here, I'll copy it from over here.
You mean when time is not of the essence, the promisee must have been willing to enter into the contract without an insurance that the promise will be performed strictly? Is that what you...
Yeah. If time's not of the essence, a failure to perform does not allow you to terminate immediately. That's right. And we tend to call those open contracts.
Yeah, that's where you need like a notice of time.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yes.
Reasonable time.
Yes, absolutely. And that's
Reasonable, yes.
That is the key, isn't it? It has to be reasonable. Now, if you look at Luinda and Lace, tell me what are we'll number these ones. What are the time delays that have to happen? So you've got, say, obligation X. In your contract, it says obligation X has to, so we'll just say here, party X has to do obligation Y, and that's all it says. Yeah, so it's an open contract because you've got a term, you've got an obligation to do something, but no indication as to when it has to be done. So what do you have to do then if they've hung off and not done anything, it's set up?
What she did, listen, sorry, let someone else speak if they want to.
What do you have to wait for? What amount of time do you have to wait for first?
Does it have to be a reasonable time?
Yes.
For
If
who?
you want the other party to perform, you must first wait a reasonable time for them to perform. So that's your first reasonable time.
Is this based on, your standard objective test of what is reasonable?
It's going to depend on what the obligation is as to what is reasonable. If you have a little look at the Lorinda and Capalaba Park case, they don't really say what they think is a reasonable time. They certainly say that 13 days notice to comply in that, the notice that was sent was not sufficient. But they don't say what they think. They say, anything less than 2 weeks is not good. So, and they only, because of the delay in delivery, they were 1 day short of the magical 2 weeks. I think anything in this kind of circumstance, less than about a month would be pushing it. But obviously, like if you have a read of the Coca-Cola case, for example, there were very strict time imperatives because there was a big ad campaign and they'd spent a lot of money on the ad campaign. And so time was much more important there for things to be done properly. So it's really going to depend. It's much like, Helen's a piece of string. It's going to depend on the factual matrix and how important that obligation is to be done quickly or not. Okay? So you're going to wait your first reasonable time. Then you have to give a what?
Notice.
Yes. Then you can serve a notice to complete. Now, what I want you to remember from Luinda and Lace. Firstly, back up. What do you have to put? 3 magical things in a notice to complete. You have to say.
What's
What it is that you want, the time frame in which that you want it, and what you're objecting to, or what. And then the consequences.
Yes. The big fight in Lorinda and Capalaba Park, wasn't it, was they said our client may reserve its rights. And that phrase, a couple of the judges seemed to think was not enough.
Well, I was saying it wasn't specific enough, weren't they? That it wasn't clear.
Wasn't clear. You've got to really show that you're darn serious about this, okay? Put up or else. Okay, so that's your notice to complete. Now, what I want you to kind of just bookmark in the back of your brain, Luinda and Lace, we'll do that. And then I'll shift it over here. Now, I really like this case because if you think about it, right, if you have a contract, you've agreed the terms, you've signed it off, can one party just change the contract willy-nilly?
No, it's stated by Fry.
Yeah, so...
Unilateral changing it and making it an essential term after.
You can't, can you? So... this does...
Not unless you have agreement of the other parties and all that sort of stuff, then it can become a new contract even.
Yeah, well, then you need new consideration as well.
Exactly.
That's right. So it does turn an inessential time obligation in terms of time into magically an essential term. What does it do?
Well,
Well, it makes time of the essence, doesn't it?
No, because that would be turning an inessential term into an essential term.
Sorry, yes, yeah.
Okay? So what it does do is give you evidence of repudiation.
Yeah.
So you serve your notice to complete, and then what do you have to do?
Wait more reasonable time.
Yes, yes. And then after that, you can terminate. Yes?
Do you still have to serve another notice first, though, or just after the second reasonable time, then you can terminate?
Then terminate.
Okay.
Yes. And that's always a scary proposition. I don't care how clear things are, even if you've got a contractual right, it's a scary step to take. Okay, so that is kind of what I wanted to talk about in terms of recapping, just to make sure we're all square on what we need to be square on for the exam.
Will you make this available for us to take a copy of?
Oh, yes.
Cool.
There's a reason why I've made notes like I have. Okay, so the second issue obviously is being unable to perform, and like I said, that's much more along the an investor's coalitory kind of situation, and also the Coca-Cola situation. Did anyone manage to look at that Coca-Cola case? Yeah.
Yes.
Oh, cool. Okay. Yay. All right. So for this week's, this is just straight from Moodle. Imagine we're representing Coca-Cola in the Hammer and Barrow case. So we have Coca-Cola in New Zealand placing an order with Hammer and Barrow to make 200,000 yo-yos. The yo-yos were to be distributed to retailers used as promotional items. There was a considerable ad campaign associated with rollout. The first batch produced 85,000. In fact, it was 85,000 in dribs and drabs. There was, about 4 different lots that were supplied over, about 2 weeks. I think it was about 2 weeks. Let's see. No, it's not it. It was a reasonably short amount of time. Now, they were delivered to Coca-Cola's bottling company in Auckland. So Northern Bottling was considered to be an agent of Coca-Cola. Of those 85,000, 80% were effective. All right.
That's a poor QA department.
I know. Oh, dear. Now, they had actually complained a couple of times. They were right onto it, as soon as they got the first batch. The first batch had problems with, how you've got the yo-yo and you've got the two halves? Well, whatever they were using to injection mold those two halves was not working properly. So when they stuck the two halves together, the halves that were closest to the string were all rough, and so the string didn't want to go down the string properly because of the roughness of the plastic. And then the next lot that they delivered, there was something wrong with the way that the thing was travelling on the string. So, yeah, it just, I mean, there's not much point in having a yo-yo if you can't get it to go up and down. I mean, yeah, so they refused acceptance, rejected the goods, purported to terminate for anticipatory breach. Somebody tell me what anticipatory breach is.
Or you're anticipating that they're not going to be able to perform the contract.
Yes, so it's a breach before the actual time for performance. So they've delivered these 85. They were faulty. There was another 115,000 to come, but they certainly didn't want the other 115,000 on the basis of what they'd already seen. Yes. So they got these 85,000. They said, no, we don't want to accept these. And that was one argument that happened in the case. And also they said, we're going to just terminate now. Don't even bother with the rest of the 115,000. We're going to send the 85,000 back as well. Okay. So in relation to the 115 that hadn't been made, that was an anticipatory breach, okay? In relation to the ones that had been delivered, they were certainly not up to spec, okay? That was an actual breach. So Hammer and Barrow, it was quite a nice argument. Can you tell me what Hammer and Barrow argued, Michael, from memory, in relation to the sale of goods? It was a bit of a tricky technical argument. You got to, hats off. I mean, they were probably scratching the bottom of the barrel with this. But anyway, what they said was, can you remember back to your sale of goods stuff that you did last term? They said, what we've done, Harrow and Barrow were the rubbish manufacturers, okay? They said that under the New Zealand sale of goods legislation, that Coca-Cola, because they had said don't deliver it to us in the US, but deliver it to us at our New Zealand agents, they said that constituted acceptance of the goods. Okay. Now, the goods had never gone to Coca-Cola. The goods had only ever been delivered to Northern bottlers. So Hammer and Barrow was trying to say, just by virtue of the contract stating that you don't want all of these yo-yos delivered to you, you want the yo-yos delivered to Northern bottlers, we're going to say that you've accepted the goods and therefore you can't reject them now because they've gone on to a third party, and by virtue of them going to a third party, that action is considered to be a dealing with the goods that is inconsistent with the original supplier's title of ownership. So remember,
wouldn't that only be acceptance of the 85,000 though? Or is it under the goods legislation, it's just once you take one item, you've accepted the whole deal?
That would be in relation to the 85.
Yeah, okay. But they weren't trying to get rid of the 80. They had accepted the 85 anyway, though, hadn't they? It was the 115.
No, they were going to send them back.
No,
okay.
There was 51 cases that had been actually accepted, and the reason why they said that those ones had been accepted was because Northern bottlers had sent them out to shops to sell as part of the ad campaign. But there was another 97 cases of the 85 total that had been delivered. There was 97 cases left that hadn't been sent on to retailers. So what they wanted to do was to send those 97 cases back and recall the ones that had been sent to the retailers, and then once the retailers had sent them back, then send those back as well, and stop delivery of the 115. Okay. So not surprisingly, they could terminate. The two issues were the anticipatory breach. So could they knock it on the head and say, we're just going to send everything we've got back, plus we don't want the 115 because we're terminating now. And this is one of those cases, and I wanted to mention this to you before you go wading in to Progressive Mailing House and Lorinda and Calabar Park and all of those. Just be real patient with judges, because quite often they'll talk about rescinding when they should be talking about terminating. Okay, so someone please refresh my mind. What's the difference between rescinding and terminating?
Rescinding is taking it back to the place where you were originally prior to the contract, and terminating
Initio.
Generally just right now, tough luck, it's done.
That's it. Terminating chops it off where it is, and anything that happened beforehand stays on foot. Okay, so if there's an obligation to pay for an instalment, for example, that crystallised just before you terminate, that obligation is still on foot. Okay, so everything stays on foot up to the date of termination. Rescission is where you unpick that contract back to the beginning, and as if it never happened. You're right, Tam, ab initio. So be patient. This is one of those areas of law where judges notoriously get fuzzy with their terminology, and I want you guys to be crystal clear on which is what. Okay, so could they terminate for anticipatory breach? Yes, they certainly could, because, as I said before, the inability of Hammer and Barrow to complete could be inferred from just how bad that first batch was. Okay, number of different reasons. And here, this is something Tam talked about the other day when we were shooting the breeze in relation to performance. The ratio the breach bore to the contract as a whole was very considerable. So here we're starting to look at the magnitude of the breach. And they do actually go on to look at entire and divisible contracts in this decision. So when you have a spare few hours in the middle of the night at between 2 a.m. and 3 a.m., you can go on Fossick amongst the case and find that for you. I think I've extracted it in this set of notes for you anyway. But because of, that was what, almost a half of the yo-yos had been delivered. They were just rubbish. So that's one thing they took into account. The other thing they took into account was that the breach had occurred really early on, and time was at a premium here because of the nature of the ad campaign. And so there was no evidence that the manufacturer could correct things quickly enough. So that was another reason why it all indicated, that there was an inability to perform. The fact, and this was no small part of the whole decision. I don't know if you guys ever remember having gotten a yo-yo when you were a kid as part of one of these campaigns, but I certainly did. And it was just this craze, and the craze hung around for maybe, I don't know, a month or 6 weeks, and then it was all over Red Rover. And I think the court appreciated that. So that did factor into their decision quite a bit. And you couldn't get replacements elsewhere quickly. So yes, they could terminate for anticipatory breach. Not a real tough decision to appreciate intellectually, really, but just another good example of inability to perform, leading to a conclusion of repudiation. Okay. Now, remembering where you are trying to argue that your particular brand of repudiation that's relevant in your case is being unable to perform, you do have to show that you're wholly and finally disabled. Well, certainly in Australia you do. And that's the case of Almond Investors and Koala Tree. I've also put some notes about Coca-Cola rejecting the ones that had been delivered. And you can read that in your own time. What I will go through, let's have a look here. I can copy and paste, I think. There was an issue of substantial performance that was discussed, but I'll just pop that on a different page again. So what they were talking about was this issue of, can we slice up this contract to, get payment for the ones that had been accepted. Okay, we can talk about that in just a second. But let's just do our brief IRAC. It's not going to be a whole lot of mental toing and froing, really, because the issues are fairly clear here, I think. So what would you say was the issue? Someone give me a good one-liner issue sentence for that case.
Can Coca-Cola terminate on the grounds of anticipatory breach?
Yep. There we go. Okay, hit me with some rules.
Would the Almond case come into this?
Yes. Why don't I copy some rules down and then we can flesh out, because rules are kind of boring to talk about. Why don't we just talk about the cool stuff here? So you can terminate either at common law for breach of condition, or now that's just a bit of fluff, really. I guess if you're in an exam, you wouldn't really need to put that in. That's more relevant. There we go. So then you're just saying repudiation occurs when one party by words or conduct indicates they're unwilling or unable to perform the whole of a contract or a fundamental oblig. And this is your formulation for being unable. Test is whether a reasonable person in the other party's shoes would see the conduct as a renunciation of the whole or a fundamental obligation. More particularly, here, as I said before, if you need to be arguing the inability to perform issue here, we need to be wholly and finally disabled. The other party has to be wholly and finally disabled from performing. Because remember, if there is a chance of them still performing, you need to give them every opportunity to do so. It's a really serious thing to terminate. And before a court will hold that you have done so properly, you need to have been reasonable in your approach. And if there is some prospect of them still performing in a reasonably timely manner, then, you need to let them go ahead and do that.
So that's where your notices and all that sort of stuff will come in.
Yes. Yeah. Okay. Now, why don't we go through a little bit of almond investors and koala tree? I like that. I wonder if they called it koala tree. It just sounds like a koala in a tree, doesn't it? I wonder if they were trying to make some kind of pun with their company name. Who knows? Tell me a little bit about that case. Now, this case is useful. One aspect of this case will be useful for the exam. So it's good to talk about it. What happened there?
Wasn't there a contract to provide 90,000 almond trees at a height of 0.9 and they're a year old?
Oh, tree. Yes. 0.9 metres tall. They were to be 12 months old. And for delivery 2007. Yes. Now.
They couldn't meet the numbers.
Yes. Why would you make a contract like that if you the stupidity of people continues to amaze me.
But there was also, it was $1, it was $8.70 or $8.50 if they were a year older. So they're trying to get so many valued at $8.50 or thereabouts as opposed to the $7.
Well, as a farmer and having run a greenhouse, you've got weather problems as well that, you might think that within 1 year, if you've done it before, you can replicate it, but you may not be able to replicate it like across the board, depending upon where in the greenhouse they are. All those kind of factors come in. So, if they were going to try for that, they should have done twice as many seeds to ensure that the contract could have been, carried out.
Yes.
It's not stupid from my perspective, having studied agriculture and all those kind of things and having farmed myself for many, many decades. But that kind of promise, they should have had an insurance by ensuring they did double the seedings. You know what I mean?
Yes.
I've done it with Christmas trees, for example, and it just depends on the actual weather, regardless of where how you control your greenhouse even. You know what I mean?
Yes. It's like the other tutorial problem we had with the guy that agreed to wholesale the rabbit fur, force majeure clause. I don't think a force majeure clause was going to get them out of problems with the almond investors case, unfortunately. So first third was delivered. So you can see there's some immediate parallels here with the Coca-Cola case, isn't there? First third was delivered. Some of those had problems with quality. Some of those were rejected. I will put in here the buyer actually refused or didn't pay for those, and this invoice was still outstanding when trial occurred. Okay, why is that important?
Because
you can't be in breach yourself.
Yes, you can't be certainly in breach of an essential term. You cannot be in breach of an essential term. So what did the court say that the obligation to pay the invoice was? It was a non-essential term. So yes, they were in breach, but it was a non-essential term. Okay, so it didn't stop them from accepting the other party's repudiation at the end of the day. The email suggested that the remaining deliveries would be met with 22,000 trees that didn't meet the contractual specifications. what they said is that we're just going to plant a whole heap of new trees, and that doesn't matter because we can get them to you next year, even though the contract was specifically for immediate delivery of all 90,000 of them. Okay, there was just a provision in the contract that said if you don't happen to want all 90,000 right now, we can keep whatever amount you don't want in our greenhouse, but it's going to cost you more because they're going to be taller and more robust and all of that stuff if you wait another year. So that was the proviso. You know, they did have the opportunity to put off delivery if they wanted to. But the actual terms of the contract was for delivery of the 90,000 all at once. And, you know, the court goes through and says, look, you can't say that we'll just give you a third and plan a whole heap more and, oh, well, you know how the contract said there was a proviso, you can wait until next year. Well, we're just going to rely on that to say that we don't have to actually provide you with all 90,000 now. Of course, that didn't fly. Okay. So the Almond Investors people claimed that the email constituted a repudiation and they went ahead and they accepted that. Okay. How are we then? So a good here. Let me just pop in what it was held. Parties being held to repudiate for being unable to perform, they have to be wholly and finally disabled, which I've flagged to you before. So when you're talking about inability or unable to perform, you have to meet that wholly and finally disabled formulation. The email indicated they only had 45,000, despite the fact that they promised 90. As Mary said, they should have planted twice the trees in order to be able to get that 90,000. And you know, there was 22,000 trees only planted in 2007. So if you recall, they were meant to be 12 months old by 2007. So that plus other correspondence indicated that they were unwilling, unable and unwilling. Okay, so they could terminate. A good application will then contrast that with the case at hand. So if we're talking about the Coca-Cola case, how would you be comparing the two then? Maybe they used the deposits on a new car. Yes, maybe they did. Like in that other tutorial, a new car,
Well,
laptop and cable TV.
the difference was, in this case, from my understanding and memory, correct me if I'm wrong, they actually kept the viable plants. But in Coca-Cola, they wanted them all returned. They didn't want anything to do with it. So that was a difference in the cases.
Yes. Can you give me, that's not going to, if what we're going to do is try and do an IRAC for the Coca-Cola case, what similarities are you going to be pointing to?
You'd be looking at the fact that there was rejection for quality.
Yeah.
And also about a substantial amount of rejection as well.
Yes. I'm just
It wasn't just a couple.
Here's something I prepared earlier. Here in the Coca-Cola case, we have a contract for delivery of presentable working yo-yos. There was actual delivery of 80,000 out of the 200, of say 40-odd%. Of that, 81% were defective in appearance or workability. I'd
also look at the fact that their similarity was also the failure to complete. Like Coca-Cola, or the yo-yos, they were actually already running behind with that production as well.
You're saying here also there was a failure to deliver the rest, or what was the point?
They were also running behind in the remainder of the delivery. So regardless of the fact that it was a quality issue. They were both similarities where they were running behind with the actual ability to perform the complete contract, just in quantity.
Okay, I don't remember that part of the case, but thank you for picking that up. Thank you for picking that up. Also, in that case, remember we have the issue that there was a promotion. So the advertising for the promotion would only last a certain amount of time. The rest would be required in a timely fashion. Otherwise, the cost and expense would be wasted. So you know how, I mean, this was 1960, but even then, you know, cost of advertising is never cheap. And they would have had, in those olden days, you know, billboards. I don't know whether they had TV ads. It doesn't really say in the discussion of the case, but there might have been radio jingles or whatever you had in 1960. You know, so there was that also. There was the time pressure.
And that cost would still be substantial, even in 1969's terms.
Yeah, exactly. It would definitely be substantial. I guess here, was there any time pressure in Koalatri? So we could say here...
Not really, because the time from planting these trees to their maximum production is 15 years anyway. So, you know, we're not talking about huge economic...
It's about the terms of the contract, though. So terms of the contract were they wanted X amount at X size. It's not about what they'll actually do in 20 years.
Yeah.
0.9. And also the height.
Contract stipulated it.
Yeah, and if they're not at that size after a year or so, then they're going to be the weak ones. They're the runts.
Height does not necessarily indicate quality, you know.
No, it doesn't, but the case actually states it, though.
But the contract stated it.
Yeah.
The case actually says that the ones that are taller are more robust and more likely because of their height to be less susceptible to...
Yeah, the shorter ones were susceptible to disease or something, weren't they?
Yes, in those particular almond trees. Yeah.
Which shows great ignorance of agriculture, but anyway.
But it's in a case, and if it's in a case, Mary, it must be true.
It's precedent.
It's just like Facebook. It's just like Facebook. If it's on Facebook,
it's on Facebook, it's true. It's in a case, it must be true, of course. Like it's in the newspaper, it must be true. And Facebook, of course.
Yeah.
Thanks for tonight, Amanda. I've got to run. Week 6's isn't up yet. The Zoom notes there as well, so they'll go up.
Oh, they're not up?
No, I just had a quick check, but I've got to run.
There are no notes. There are no notes because remember that was our skills building week.
The where, sorry?
That was our skills building week. Remember?
So there's no notes.
There's no notes because remember we just cruised around case base and a few other things.
We did too. Yes. Thank you. Yeah.
So there won't be any there, but all of these will go up.
Yeah. Beautiful. Thank you.
Okay. Well, we can kind of.
Thanks, Michael.
Yeah, pretty much now. There was some time sensitivity in Coca-Cola case, the advertising, so then you just making a few comparisons as to time, and yes, I've just got here. Was this defective delivery an implied repudiation? Were they wholly and finally disabled? Yes. Okay, so the conclusion you would be putting would be they're entitled to accept the repudiation and terminate. So that's, again, just another little, I guess, dissection of an IRAC analysis. So you're picking a case that seems to be a little bit relevant. You're talking about that case. You're picking a point in the case to discuss. So partial delivery, it was rubbish quality, and in the Qualitary case, there was also an issue of time sensitivity. Here, there's an issue of time sensitivity. So you're going through the case, you're pulling out the facts that are relevant, you're going to your case, you're saying, oh, well, similarly here on that issue, and you're pulling out some facts from your case, and then you're going to the next little aspect of the case that you want to pull out to highlight. Time sensitivity, okay, in our case, we also have a bit of time sensitivity. And then you're just giving a nice little pithy conclusion.
Sorry, just in that last paragraph, would you say, though, that with the almond case, oh, no, that's all right, that was the actual test for wholly unable to perform. That's okay, I just answered my own question.
That's our test. That test wasn't in the hammer case.
No, but it's in the almond case. Isn't that the case that almond stipulates? Yeah. That's right.
Yes. And it's, it's just common sense, really. It's just common sense because, like I said, termination's really, it's a super serious issue. So you can't, if there is a chance of the other party being able to perform, then you have to give them a reasonable opportunity to do so.
See, I see that wholly and finally disabled more clear in that Coca-Cola case than I do in the Almond Investors case.
Well, the problem was that the Almond Investors case called for immediate delivery of 90,000, and the email said, we don't have 90,000 to give you. We'll go ahead and plant some, and they'll be a year old by next year, but we don't have the 90,000. And
gotcha.
Pretty clear. It was pretty clear. So, and what they wanted to give were plants that were not 12 months old. Do you know what I mean? So, again, defective kind of thing, defective delivery. As I said, there was an issue of, they had a talk about, was there substantial performance? And then I've just gone through to remind you about, that those two bookends of when you're talking about substantial performance. You've got Hennig and Isaacs on one side where the defects were quite minor, and then the Bolton and Mardeep on the other end where the defects were quite major. So even if there was substantial acceptance, then, you've got issues here. I think they did have to pay for the ones that they had accepted, but I would be making an argument like this,
I'd be going further as well, 80% defective.
Yeah, I would have, I'll put that, I can delete that now. So that's the Coca-Cola case. Any queries? We all good? I will put these up for you.
You were saying, sorry, before, there was something in the almond case that might be relevant for the exam.
Yes.
Okay.
There are a couple of different extracts of the almond case in the case book. One of them is at 20.31 of the old 2013 text, which I think you should definitely have a look at. And the other one, let me just get it for those people that have the 2018, if they have the 2018 text, there is, I'm just trying to see if I can give you in the 2018 text, it's 20.46. That is the 2018 casebook, And the 2013 casebook is the extract is at 20.31. I think you'll find that quite useful. Okay. Yay. Any other queries?
Nope, thank you.
Okay, I'll put this up now for you in case anyone's on a roll and wants to print this stuff out. Other than that, that's all, folks. I will stop sharing so I can see all of your beautiful faces. Go and have some dinner. Bye, guys.